All right. So I saw The Batman, and I have a few thoughts. But before we get into it, if this is your first time to the channel, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe, hit that like, and support the show. I really appreciate it. You can also find me on Instagram at MarkNerdyAF. There I post all the stuff I like to collect. Comic books, omnibuses, statues, slabs, you name it. It's all there. So go check it out. So I went to the theater on Friday. And typically for, these big releases, I usually go Thursday night. But I decided to go Friday. And I obviously saw all the reviews that were coming out. And I'm also part of I'll call it like a movie review podcast. So with that Instagram that I oversee, there's a lot of movie, I'll call them like cinephile Instagrammers that post, and I see all the reviews. And the overwhelming response was, people really were enjoying this portrayal of Batman, and they really had a great time at the movie. So, of course, that pumped me up to go see it. So Friday night, I'm in the theater watching it. Pretty packed theater. And it was a little bit different because I didn't have a lot of kids in the theater, so I had a feeling that it was going to be a different feel to a Batman movie, unlike anything that we've had before. And I also did see those reviews, and people were saying, yo, this is super dark. Don't bring your kids. So maybe that circulated and people got the message. So after just watching it and coming out of the theater, after upwards of 3 hours, I can say that I did really like it. Now, there are some things that I did have problems with, and we'll get into them shortly. But overall, I thought it was a great movie. I thought especially the way that Pattinson portrayed Batman, it was unlike anything that we've seen before. The story, the plot was unlike anything we've seen before. This is a heavy detective noir type Batman story. And I think Matt Reeves accomplished a lot with this film. Let's talk about the cast. So we have Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman. She did great, and I wasn't surprised by that. I'm a big Zoe Kravitz fan. She's beautiful. I could already tell, like, just the way she carries herself in real life, like she would be a perfect Catwoman, and I think she was. I'm not going to say a perfect Catwoman, but I thought so far she was my favorite Catwoman that we've seen in live action to date. Jeffrey Wright as James Gordon. He's always good in everything he does. I mainly know him from Westworld, but he kills it, and I'll call him a little bit underrated because when he's been in quite a few films and shows, and I feel like people kind of always overlook him, and maybe they don't, but in my opinion, people don't talk enough about Jeffrey Wright and how amazing of an actor he is. His chemistry with Batman was really good. I will say at sometimes he kind of felt like clueless about a lot of things, the Riddler, but he was not as smart as, typically reading the comic books. Jim Gordon, he's a pretty quick guy. Like he catches on pretty quickly. He knows his shit. Maybe it's just because this is the first, maybe because he's not there yet as, coming up in the ranks in the Gotham PD. Maybe once he gets to be commissioner, we'll see that side of him. And that's if they continue this franchise, which I think they will. And we'll get to that too. But overall, I think he did an excellent job as Jim Gordon. Did I say James earlier? He is James Gordon, but everyone knows him by Jim. I don't know why I said that. Sorry if I did. Next, this is going to be short, but let's talk about John Turturro as Carmine Falcone. I think this is one character I can just say didn't really do it for me, but at the same time, I didn't mind John Turturro as Carmine Falcone. I thought he did okay. The one thing about him is he just doesn't really seem that intimidating, especially when you look at some of the past roles he's had. But regardless, I do think he embodied the intimidating Gotham mob boss that Carmine Falcone is. But that was it. I think he was fine. He was essential to the story and moving the plot along. But overall, there wasn't anything about his performance that blew me away. Next, we had Andy Serkis as Alfred Pennyworth. Another great casting that honestly I was unsure of how it was going to be. I mean, it wasn't weird that he was casted for this movie, especially with Matt Reeves directing it, because Matt Reeves did, 2 Planet of the Apes movies, and Andy Serkis was Caesar, I guess, or yeah, the main chimpanzee. But typically he does a lot of that acting where it's not really showing him acting. He's doing the acting, but he's hooked up to all this CG stuff, and he becomes a different being. He becomes Gollum. He becomes Caesar from Planet of the Apes. I know he was in Black Panther, and he did a great job. I just wasn't sure how he was going to be in this movie. It reminded me a lot of Batman Earth 1. If you don't read comics, that is just a different universe of Batman stories. And in this universe, Alfred is just a badass army vet. He has a cane, just like in this movie. And he just gives off this different vibe. He's still very caring about Bruce Wayne, but overall, he's a badass. And I feel like we would have gotten that if we had more of this Alfred Pennyworth by Andy Serkis, but we didn't. And that was my one issue, is that we barely got to see the relationship between him and Bruce Wayne, and it was kind of a downer. It is what it is. Hopefully we'll see more of that in movies to come. Next up is Colin Farrell as a Penguin. The standout performance. If you've been looking online, this isn't anything new. I feel like everyone's talking about this, and I also was surprised about this because in news articles, he was mentioning how he wasn't in this movie that much. I was like, God damn, he looks awesome. He looks nothing like Colin Farrell. It's crazy when you look at all the makeup and prosthetics that they used to transform him into the Penguin. It's mind-blowing. But he was in this more than I thought he would be. And I would say one of the craziest, fast-paced, high-intensity action scenes was with Colin Farrell's Penguin and the Batman. And not to really spoil it, but it was a car chase scene. And it used, to my knowledge, a lot of practical effects. And this movie did a great job at not just pounding you over the head with CGI and all these bizarre visual effects. It was, for the most part, very practical. A lot of practical effects. Cinematically, it was beautiful. But you could just tell, like, they spent a lot of time making this seem as grounded and as real as possible. All these characters were extremely grounded. You can just tell by the way they look. They're in their earlier days, I'll call it, where, Zoe Kravitz is Catwoman. She doesn't have an actual full-on suit. I mean, she's making this on her own. She's too busy, leading this other life and going to work and then committing all these heists. And this is what she's dealt with. And she's got to make do with what she has. And yeah, I guess that's the mask that she would have created. She's not going to waste her time making this really crazy, intricate suit, kind of like what we saw with Michelle Pfeiffer. So the way the characters, especially from a costume design standpoint, the way they were portrayed on screen just made it feel really grounded. Like, this could be real life. What's happening in Gotham right now could really be, what could happen in our lives. Paul Dano as the Riddler. This was another casting I was a little unsure of. I know him from Prisoners, where Hugh Jackman is taking that hammer to him in the bathroom, thinking that he was the one that kidnapped his daughter. That really crazy intense scene is what I kind of know Paul Dano from. So I didn't really have that much of an opinion on it. I know that he's been getting more and more work, and he's a serious actor. So I will say I was a little surprised at how much I did like him in this role, especially with the costume. I wasn't that big of a fan of that, but I think that's because this is an earlier Riddler. But the one standout scene I can think of is when Dano, there's a scene where he's getting interrogated by Batman, per se, and they're in Arkham Asylum. And the reason why I there were times where I was like, he's reaching a little bit. He's kind of meshing these Joker characteristics a little bit with the Riddler, and I thought that was kind of weird, like he was overacting a little bit. But there were times, like in this interrogation scene, before he would get into his crazy, uncontrollable laugh, just the way he would react to questions the Batman was asking or the way Batman was responding, the smile he had really reminded me of the clever and creepy Riddler that always thinks he's one step ahead of Batman. I do think there are parts where I was like, I didn't expect that from you. He had a lot of impressive scenes. I will say there weren't too many. He was kind of in the background a lot during the story that took place throughout this movie. But yeah, I'm a little bit indifferent. I'm still thinking about his performance. And yeah, there were things I liked. There were some things I'm like, I don't know. I don't really see Riddler acting like that. But hey, he was a good villain. I will say that. Finally, Robert Pattinson as Batman. I'll always remember when, I want to say in like maybe early 2019, it might have even been late 2018, whenever they made the announcement, on our Chumpcast Instagram, my podcast, I made a post that said, like to support the Robert Pattinson casting as Batman, comment to complain. And as you would assume, there was a lot of people that were complaining about this casting. And typically there were people that don't realize that he is actually a phenomenal actor and is very impressive on screen with his range and the movies he takes on. So with me knowing all that, I wasn't one of the people to say, oh, is he going to sparkle? I knew what he was going to bring to the table. And I think he showed us all. He shut up a lot of people. And I'm glad this happened because, man, there was no doubt in my mind, but you can't say the majority of people were doubtful because they for sure were. They did the same thing with Heath Ledger when he was casted as Joker. People don't learn, but that's all right. That's all right. He did an awesome job as Batman. And I will talk about Bruce Wayne. I will address some of the negative feedback, which I completely get, but we'll get to that. So overall, the casting, I don't think you could have casted a better set of actors for this movie. And you can really tell that they took a lot of time prepping for these roles because, man, the way that everyone was acting on screen, it just reminded me of the comic books. It reminded me of what kind of how I think about these characters as I read them, as I've grown up reading them. And yeah, this was unlike anything I've seen live action wise for a Batman movie. So next I want to talk about Gotham just a little bit. This was a mesh of New York City, Chicago, I'll say. I mean, Chicago people love talking about Gotham. We do feel like we are the Gotham of America. So I got to shout out Chicago, me being from Chicago. But also, it had the London vibes. I know a lot of people knew this was shot in London. Those were like the initial photos we got to see on set were being shot in London, those like motorcycle scenes. So Matt Reeves did an amazing job at visually bringing us a Gotham that was pulled right out of the comic book pages. People that don't read the comics don't know how dark, how gritty, how depressing Gotham is. And I had a buddy say, why was it always raining in Gotham? That's Gotham. It's just so shitty. It's terrible living there. And I would attribute that to maybe the pollution because I believe if a city is heavily polluted, it just rains all the time. I'm going to go with that. Could be wrong, but yeah, everything is just so in development still. The roads, There was this like Times Square area that kind of gave me like Blade Runner feels, but was just, it wanted to be futuristic, but it was just still really shitty. And rarely were there scenes with daylight. And I love that. I love that, at least for this first movie. The fighting scenes, speaking of darkness and no daylight, Matt Reeves did a really good job at, the choreography and being able to see the time that was put into these fight scenes and the choreography with it being dark. I mean, you had these muzzle flashes from the guns that with that light, you were just seeing these motions of Batman beating the crap out of these goons. I will say, I think it was, from a combat perspective, my favorite depiction of Batman beating the shit out of people. There wasn't too much of it, but I will argue with people all day on this is okay. We'll talk about Ben Affleck for a second. That warehouse scene, freaking amazing. What else is there to show, though? There might have been one or two more scenes that I forgot that most likely weren't that memorable. That warehouse scene was very memorable. People still repost it all the time. Look at this Batman scene. It's freaking amazing. I agree. But we had more screen time of Ben Affleck, and they didn't do much in that category, in my opinion. This has already shown us that there's a lot of potential in the combat category for Pattinson, for Robert Pattinson's Batman. So I'm stoked for that. Dark Knight, there's a special place in my heart for Dark Knight, but I will be the first to admit combat isn't that great. Christian Bale's Batman is throwing elbows most of the time, and it just looks super slow. And that might be because of how Nolan shoots his fighting scenes. Whatever. I thought the fighting, the mechanics, and the overall choreography of these fight scenes were unreal. They're really good. For you comic book readers, there are a good amount of Easter eggs, and this isn't going to be a spoiler review, so I'm not going to really talk about it. I will say there are a lot of references, from what I've noticed, to The Long Halloween, whether it be within the plot or just subtle little clues that are left as to maybe this is going to apply to the future of the franchise of these movies. Who knows? But if you're a comic book reader, you will have a great time. I wouldn't say look for them the first time watching this, because you're going to be taking in a lot. Just enjoy the movie, and maybe you see it a second time. Maybe wait till it comes out on HBO, and I think it comes out April 19th, maybe. It's sometime in April. But maybe during that time, really focus in on some of the Easter eggs. And I know you can just go to articles and look for them. But I did notice a few throughout this first viewing, and it was awesome. I'm like, oh my God, people aren't going to pick up on that. Well, maybe some people that know the comic books. But I thought it was really clever the way they did some of these little Easter eggs to make callbacks to the older comics that this was influenced by. All right, and last two topics to wrap this up. Let's talk about the Batman versus Bruce Wayne, how Pattinson did in that category. Batman, as I mentioned, amazing. Really great. Now, Bruce Wayne. Really depressing Bruce Wayne. Really depressing. There were a lot of times where I'm like, this isn't Bruce Wayne. This isn't how he would act. But I kept, and I don't know if I should be doing this. And if you weren't doing this, I get it. If you were one of those people like, he's not Bruce Wayne at all. This is shit. He should put on this facade of being this playboy billionaire. I understand that. And that is what we've had with Keaton's Batman, with Bale's Batman, with Affleck's Batman. I completely understand. I understand where people are getting that gripe from. However, what I will say is I came to what I'll call an understanding and thinking that, this is year 2 Batman. And they make it pretty clear in this movie, he's very focused on vengeance, getting back at the people that have ruined his life, stopping the crime in the city, but more so thinking about himself and being selfish in a way, and just zoning in on taking out aggression. And he's angry. And yes, he seems super depressed. And what I think is going on with what Robert Pattinson was doing is this Bruce Wayne doesn't know how to be Bruce Wayne yet. He's still figuring that out, or maybe he wasn't trying to figure that out through the whole movie. But I think at the end of this movie, we get an understanding like Batman is going to rethink things, recalculate kind of the way he's been acting. And I think that's what they're going to do if they continue this franchise. So with that, I can see what Pattinson was doing, why he was acting the way he was as Bruce Wayne. I just think this is a young Batman, which I know we haven't seen in the other movies. They haven't done this with Bruce Wayne. They haven't given us maybe the side of him before. But I truly do think what he was doing is he was just showing that this Bruce Wayne wasn't ready to be Bruce Wayne yet and just didn't know how to be Bruce Wayne yet. Was too focused in on being Batman and living that life and didn't want to give the Bruce Wayne lifestyle the time of day for now. Now, as for the future of the franchise, some people are saying DCEU maybe. No. I'm going to put this out there and predict it right now. No, I don't think so at all. And you might be thinking, well, what about Momoa? What about Ezra? What about what they've already established? Okay. I don't think it's going to last that much longer with those characters. And I truly think that Matt Reeves has this vision and doesn't care what else is going on with DC right now. He might get some pushback from the higher ups there, but I think they're going to see the success that this movie has and let Matt Reeves do what he wants. And I don't think he's going to blend those two things together. He's going to do his own thing with the Batman universe. And it's not like this can't stand on its own. It's the Batman. It's DC. It's Batman. You don't need to be part of Jason Momoa's Aquaman. I just don't think it's going to work. They're going to continue doing whatever they're going to do with the Flashpoint movie, getting Keaton in there. I think people were saying Affleck was going to be in there, but they're going to keep this separate, man. This isn't going to become Pattinson in the DCEU. And another reason I say that is because we finally have our younger looking, I know these actors for the most part, they're upper 30s or whatever, but we finally have this younger looking cast that can continue this franchise, that can really grasp these characters and take them somewhere that we want to go. We're still in these early stages of these characters. From a character development standpoint, I don't think this is the way Bruce Wayne's going to be. If the Riddler comes back, I don't think this is how the Riddler's going to look. I think we're still in the early development of even just the way these characters look on screen, their costume design, their suits that they're wearing. I think we're going to get to a point where it's a more mature, established Batman universe. But we're taking our time, man. We have a younger looking cast that seem passionate about this project and about this franchise. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get 3 or 4 more movies from this Batman universe. And to close out here, coming out of the theater, I was really happy with what I just saw. I think The Batman will become a lot of people's favorite Batman movie. It's a long movie, so be ready for it. It's almost 3 hours long. I did feel like there were some pacing issues throughout it. But the story really did come together. Again, they accomplished so much within that 3 hours. And yes, I know sitting in the theater for 3 hours is a mission, but just be prepared for it. Is this my favorite Batman movie? I don't think so. I think I'm still going to give it to The Dark Knight. I'm going to watch this one again, though. It may get even closer, though, to being my favorite, but I don't think it's going to replace The Dark Knight. And that's just my preference. But should I even be comparing it to The Dark Knight? Absolutely not. This is a Batman film that stands on its own. It does things that no other Batman film has done before. And I think you have to view it that way. If you haven't seen it, don't start comparing it. Just let it be its own thing and enjoy the ride. All right, guys. Well, if you enjoyed this little non-spoiler review, please let me know in the comments. I'm still trying to figure out the content that I'm going to be posting to this channel. I would really appreciate your input, and I do really love that you're taking time to check out these videos. So thank you so much. It means a lot to me. If you haven't done so already, again, please go ahead, support the channel, click that subscribe button down below, leave me a comment, let me know what's up, let me know if you watched The Batman, let me know your thoughts. Did you have a great time? Or were you, not like the majority of people, it seems like, where you didn't like it that much? I want to know your opinions. Let me know. All right, well, that is all I got. I'll see you nerds later. Peace.